"Are you out of your mind, Jake Callahan?" Hannah Price screamed, her voice slicing through the cool morning air like broken glass. She stood on his front porch with a bright red violation notice clutched in her manicured hand, eyes blazing, lips trembling with fury. "You've been caught hunting illegally near our homes, and the HOA is fining you $6,000. Pay up, or we'll see you in court." Jake didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just smiled, slow and steady, while Hannah's words echoed like a threat meant to crush him into silence. What she didn't know was that her little piece of paper wasn't the end of Jake's story. It was the spark. The trigger. The single shove that would set off a chain of events no one in Silverwood Hills could have predicted. Before I take you deeper into how one man toppled an entire HOA empire, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with a friend who's ever dealt with a bossy neighbor or a petty HOA. Because trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. Jake hadn't moved to Silverwood Hills looking for trouble. After serving a decade in the Army and grinding out another 7 years in corporate IT, he was worn down. City noise, endless commutes, and constant stress had left him craving one thing: peace. So when he bought a quiet home at the edge of the neighborhood, tucked against acres of untouched woods, he thought he'd finally found it. A place where mornings meant coffee on the porch, evenings meant watching the sunset fade into trees, and neighbors meant friendly waves, not drama. At first, Silverwood Hills delivered on that dream. The houses were neat, the lawns manicured, and the streets quiet. Sure, the HOA dues were high, $500 every quarter, but the listing agent had promised it was all worth it. "The board keeps everything perfect," she'd said. What she hadn't mentioned was that the board wasn't just some faceless group. It was Hannah Price, 40, sharp as a tack, always dressed like she was on her way to a law firm photo shoot, and ruthless about rules. She'd been HOA president for 6 years running. Never once challenged, never once questioned. People didn't call her president. They called her queen. Jake tried to stay out of her way. He paid his dues on time. He trimmed his grass to regulation height. He ignored the endless stream of HOA newsletters that seemed more like decrees than updates. He was fine letting Hannah play queen, as long as she left him alone. But that morning, when she waved a $6,000 fine in his face for hunting on land she didn't even own, Jake realized something chilling. Hannah didn't just want control of lawns and mailboxes. She wanted control of everything, even him. And as her high heels clicked down his porch steps, leaving that violation notice fluttering against his door, Jake felt the old soldier in him stir, the part of him that didn't bow to intimidation, the part of him that knew how to fight back. What Hannah didn't know was that Jake wasn't just some easy target. He had something she didn't expect: patience, strategy, and a stubborn refusal to lose. And in the weeks ahead, that fine she thought would break him, it would become the weapon he used to destroy her entire HOA empire, because Jake had a secret of his own. A secret hidden in the woods just beyond Silverwood Hills, and once he uncovered it, Hannah's days as queen were numbered. Jake's secret began the way most good stories do, quietly, almost accidentally. One Saturday morning, long before dawn, he slung his rifle over his shoulder and followed the tree line past his backyard. The forest stretched wide and endless, a tangle of old oaks and pines standing watch like silent soldiers. As the mist curled through the branches, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: calm. This wasn't just land. It was freedom. After a few hours of walking, Jake stumbled into a clearing that looked untouched by time. A narrow stream cut through the earth, its water whispering against smooth stones. Deer tracks dotted the damp ground. It was perfect. But Jake wasn't about to trespass blindly. He drove to the county records office and did his homework. That's where he found the truth. The woods belonged to an 85-year-old man named Harold Bennett, who'd retired to Arizona years ago. Jake tracked down Harold's email and sent a polite note, explaining he wanted to hunt responsibly on the property. To his surprise, Harold replied the very next day, "Son, I haven't set foot on that land in a decade. If you want to use it, you have my blessing. Just take care of it, and if you get a good buck, send me a picture." My late wife loved venison stew. It felt like fate. Jake had a place to carry on the tradition his grandfather taught him back in Kentucky. A place that wasn't just legal, but personal. But he didn't know the storm brewing just beyond those trees. For years, Hannah Price and her clique of HOA loyalists had treated Harold's Woods like their own. They'd carved trails into the soil, installed benches at scenic overlooks, even bragged to new homeowners about exclusive access to private hiking paths. None of it was true, of course. But Hannah's word carried weight in Silverwood Hills. If she said it was HOA land, people believed her. And she wasn't about to let one quiet ex-soldier ruin her illusion of control. The clash came one crisp November morning. Jake had been sitting in his clearing for hours when the deer finally appeared, a strong 8-point buck stepping lightly through the trees. His shot was clean. The animal dropped instantly. Jake knelt to begin the careful work of field dressing when voices echoed down the trail. Through the brush, Hannah appeared, leading 5 women dressed in matching designer athleisure, sipping from stainless steel water bottles, gossiping about neighborhood drama. When she spotted Jake with the deer, her face twisted into something primal. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, clutching her pearls like she'd stumbled onto a crime scene. "This is barbaric! This is illegal! You're a danger to the entire community!" Her voice carried through the trees as she fumbled for her phone, snapping photos like evidence for a trial. Jake stood, calmly explaining he had the landowner's permission. But Hannah cut him off with a laugh sharp enough to slice. "We manage these trails," she spat, "and we say hunting is forbidden." Her friends gasped in unison, some covering their children's ears as if Jake had just confessed to murder. By the time she stormed off, threatening to take this all the way to the board, Jake knew one thing for certain. This wasn't about hunting. It was about Hannah's obsession with control. 3 days later, the notice appeared on his door. $6,000. 30 days to pay. The HOA claimed he had disturbed the community with his cruel and violent activities. Jake's first reaction was disbelief, then anger. Because he knew the truth. The HOA had no authority over what happened outside their boundaries. None, especially not on private land where he had the owner's explicit permission. But the fine wasn't just outrageous, it was dangerous. Hannah wasn't just slapping Jake with paper threats. She was painting him as a criminal in his own neighborhood. And Jake was about to discover just how far she would go to make sure everyone believed her lies. The night of the HOA meeting, Jake could already feel the tension before he even walked into the community center. Cars lined both sides of the street. Neighbors filed inside in hushed groups, casting wary glances his way. Word had spread fast. Hannah had made sure of it. To them, Jake wasn't a quiet homeowner anymore. He was the hunter, the outsider with a gun, the man who'd supposedly put their kids in danger. Inside, the room buzzed with chatter until Hannah stepped up to the long folding table at the front. She wore her signature navy blazer, hair pinned perfectly, every inch the queen addressing her court. Beside her sat Mark Fuller, her vice president, broad-shouldered and eager to nod at whatever she said. On her other side, Richard Lang, the treasurer, looked less certain, flipping through papers with a furrowed brow. "Neighbors," Hannah began, her voice smooth and commanding, "we are here tonight because one resident has chosen violence over community values. Mr. Callahan," she tilted her chin toward him like a prosecutor pointing at a defendant, "was caught committing a brutal act of hunting on what we all know as our community nature preserve." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few gasps. A whispered, "I heard he killed it right in front of children." Jake stood slowly. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "I need to correct that," he said, holding up a folder. "First of all, I was not on HOA property. I was on land privately owned by Mr. Harold Bennett, who gave me explicit written permission to be there. Second, I was hunting legally with a valid state license. Third, this HOA has no jurisdiction outside its property lines." He laid the papers on the table, Harold's email, his hunting license. The county map showing the land wasn't part of Silverwood Hills. For a moment, the room grew quiet. Richard leaned over the documents, frowning. "He might have a point," he muttered, but Hannah's laugh cut him off. cold, dismissive. "Don't be fooled," she said, sweeping her gaze across the room. "This man is splitting hairs. Those trails have been part of our community for over a decade. We've maintained them. We've improved them. We've used them. That makes them ours," Mark chimed in, puffing up his chest. "And let's not forget the bigger issue, firearms. A man with a rifle so close to our homes, to our children? That's not just inappropriate, it's dangerous." The crowd stirred again. One mother stood up, clutching her son's hand. "I moved here for safety," she said loudly. "Now I have to worry about hunters in the woods?" Jake raised his hands, trying to cut through the rising panic. "I understand your fears, but you're being misled. I follow every safety regulation. I hunt responsibly. I never step onto HOA land. This fine," he tapped the notice in his hand, "isn't legal. It's intimidation." That's when the door opened, and Officer Greg Daniels stepped inside. He wore his police uniform, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Half the room turned toward him, relief written on their faces, as if the cavalry had arrived. Greg walked to the front, took one look at Jake's paperwork, and cleared his throat. "He's right. Everything I see here checks out. Mr. Callahan has permission. His license is valid. The land is private. Legally, the HOA has no authority." For a second, Jake thought it was over. But Hannah leaned forward, eyes narrowing into slits. "This isn't about legality, officer. This is about standards. This is about what kind of community we are. And Silverwood Hills does not condone violence. The fine stands. If Mr. Callahan refuses to comply, we'll place a lien on his property and pursue legal action." A hush fell over the room. Jake could feel every pair of eyes on him, some pitying, some fearful, some burning with judgment. Hannah sat tall, lips curling into the faintest smile, confident she had won. But Jake wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. He picked up a brochure lying on the table as he left. Its glossy cover read, "Silverwood Nature Trails, a community treasure." Inside, the map showed something that made his blood run cold. The trails Hannah bragged about? The benches? The land she claimed as hers? Every bit of it sat squarely on Harold Bennett's property. Property that wasn't hers. Property she had no right to. And in that moment, Jake realized the HOA wasn't just overstepping. They were planning something much bigger. Something that could ruin not just him, but Harold too. And if Jake played this right, it could be the very thing that destroyed Hannah's empire. Jake couldn't shake the image of that glossy brochure. Silverwood Nature Trails, a community treasure. The bold letters stretched across a map that didn't belong to them. Every trail, every bench, every community feature sat squarely on Harold Bennett's land. Land they'd claimed without asking. Land they'd built their empire on. That night, Jake called Harold. The old man's voice cracked with frustration when Jake explained. "Son, I never gave them permission to build a damn thing. Those benches, those feeders, those signs. None of that was me. And the taxes keep going up every year. Honestly, I've thought about selling it. The medical bills are piling high, and it's more than I can keep up with." Jake's mind clicked into place like a soldier locking a rifle bolt. "Harold," he said slowly, "if you're serious about selling, I'd like to make you an offer." It wasn't an easy decision. Buying 90 acres wasn't pocket change. It meant draining his savings, dipping into his inheritance, and taking a risk most people would call reckless. But to Jake, it wasn't just a purchase. It was a chance to defend himself, to cut Hannah's power at the root. Within weeks, the deal was done. The deed was signed, the ink dry. Jake Callahan, the outsider, the dangerous hunter, was now the legal owner of the very land Hannah had built her throne on. He didn't announce it right away. No, Jake waited. He let Hannah and her lapdog, Vice President Mark, build up their threats, pile on the pressure. He let the fines stack higher, the letters grow harsher. By the time they finally stormed onto his porch with a portfolio of legal documents, Jake was ready. Hannah's eyes glittered with triumph as she crossed his living room, heels striking the hardwood like gavel blows. "Mr. Callahan," she said smoothly, "this is your last chance. Pay what you owe or we'll bury you in court. Your property, your reputation gone." Mark loomed behind her, arms folded, face set in a scowl. Jake stayed calm. Too calm. He slid a folder across the coffee table with steady hands. "Before you get ahead of yourself," he said, "you might want to take a look at this." Hannah flipped it open. At first, she didn't react. Then the color drained from her face. Mark leaned over her shoulder, and his jaw actually dropped. Inside was the freshly stamped deed. 90 acres. Jake Callahan, sole owner. The very land she had bragged about for years. The same trails she'd sold as part of the HOA's identity. Gone. No, Hannah whispered, shaking her head as if sheer denial could erase the truth. No, this can't be right. We've maintained those trails for a decade. We've invested in them. They're ours. Jake leaned forward, his voice low but firm. They were never yours. And now they're mine. Which means every bench, every trail, every plan you've made on that land is trespassing. And unless you remove them immediately, you're the one breaking the law, not me. Mark tugged at his collar, his face pale. Hannah slammed the folder shut, her composure cracking like glass under pressure. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she hissed. I built this community, I own it. You can't just waltz in here and take it from me. Jake didn't blink. You're right about one thing. You don't know who you're dealing with. When they stormed out minutes later, their perfect facade slipping, Jake stood at his window and watched them scurry across the street to Jessica Miller's house, no doubt plotting their next move. He knew Hannah wouldn't give up, not without a fight, but Jake wasn't done either. Because in the files he'd pulled from the county office, he'd found something even more explosive than the deed. Hannah and her HOA weren't just trespassing. They were funneling tens of thousands of dollars into trail maintenance and park development. And the consulting firm cashing those checks? Owned by Hannah's husband and Mark's sister, fraud, embezzlement, betrayal. The fine Hannah had slapped on Jake was supposed to crush him. Instead, it had lit the fuse on a bomb that was about to blow her entire empire apart, and Jake was ready to push the button. The fuse was lit, and Jake knew Hannah was scrambling. He could see it in the neighborhood itself, the way once friendly neighbors now turned cold, whispering when he walked by, pulling their kids closer. Hannah had poisoned the well, spinning him as a dangerous outsider who wanted to destroy everything Silverwood Hills stood for. But under that surface, cracks were forming. People were asking quiet questions about money, about where their trail donations had gone, about why Hannah never showed receipts. Jake had the answers, and he was patient. He documented every threatening letter, every bogus fine, every nasty note left on his truck windshield that read things like "animal killers aren't welcome here." He knew the day would come when the truth mattered. Until then, he watched, waited, and prepared. Then Hannah made her big move. It started with flyers tucked into mailboxes. Community Trail Preservation Walk. This Saturday. Bring your family. Show solidarity against selfish outsiders who want to steal what's ours. By Friday, the Silverwood Facebook group was flooded with posts. Photos of kids in hiking boots. Families pledging to reclaim the trails. Neighbors calling Jake a thief in broad daylight. Hannah had turned the whole thing into a spectacle. A mass trespass on his land, cameras rolling, to make him look like the villain. Jake didn't panic. He got ready. With his lawyer's help, he had already reclassified much of his property as a private wildlife reserve, complete with conservation permits. New fencing had gone up. Bold signs warned private property. Wildlife reserve. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. He even built a proper gate with a posted conservation notice, making sure everything was airtight and lawful. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold. Jake stood at the gate, arms crossed, a small camera clipped to his vest. Beside him, his attorney Amanda flipped through a folder of permits. The air buzzed with tension, the kind that hums before a storm. And then she came. Hannah Price, dressed head to toe in brand new hiking gear, striding at the front of a crowd of 30. Families trailed behind her with strollers and kids on bikes. A few carried homemade signs. Trails belong to the people. And stop the outsider! Hannah raised her hiking stick like a general rallying her troops. This is outrageous, she shouted, her voice carrying over the crowd. For decades, we've enjoyed these trails. For decades, they've belonged to us. And this man thinks a piece of paper gives him the right to take it all away? The crowd murmured in agreement. Some cheered. A few kids chanted. Hannah smirked, playing to the cameras she had clearly invited. She took one step toward the gate, then froze. 3 police cruisers rolled up behind the crowd, red and blue lights flashing against the trees. Out stepped Detective Morgan, the county investigator already digging into the HOA's finances. His voice cut through the chaos, calm but commanding. "Attention, folks," he said. "This land is private property. It has been reported for repeated trespassing and vandalism. Anyone crossing this fence today is subject to arrest." His eyes locked on Hannah. "Mrs. Price, as the organizer of this event, you could face additional charges." The crowd shifted. Parents pulled their kids back. A few people started retreating to their cars. Hannah's face flushed deep red. She turned on Mark, who stood uselessly behind her, then back at the officers. "This is absurd. Tell them, Mark. Tell them these trails are ours." But Mark didn't move. He avoided her gaze, his shoulders sagging. The crowd was slipping away, her army dissolving in the face of real authority. "You're all cowards," she screamed, her voice cracking. "After everything I've done for you, you're just going to walk away?" But they were walking, one by one, abandoning her. Jake stayed silent, arms folded, watching her unravel. She finally locked eyes with him, pure venom in her glare. "This isn't over," she hissed, but the words rang hollow. For the first time, Hannah Price wasn't the queen of Silverwood Hills. She was a desperate woman on the edge of collapse, and Jake knew her empire was about to burn. Hannah's empire didn't collapse in one blow. It crumbled piece by piece, like a house of cards finally catching the wind. The first crack came when Nancy Roberts, the HOA secretary, agreed to meet Jake in a cafe 2 towns over. She sat hunched in the corner, eyes darting nervously, whispering like someone terrified of being overheard. "I can't keep covering for her," she confessed. "She's been funneling the park money to her husband's company. Fake invoices. No board approval. I've saved everything, emails, bank transfers, minutes she doctored. I couldn't live with it anymore." She slid a flash drive across the table with shaking hands. "This will bury her." Jake didn't waste time. He turned it over to Detective Morgan, who was already circling the HOA with quiet precision. Within days, subpoenas landed. A storage unit rented under Hannah's husband's name was raided. Boxes of shredded documents, fake contracts, bank records showing tens of thousands siphoned into vacation homes and luxury renovations. It wasn't just overreach anymore. It was fraud. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the community center was packed to bursting. Neighbors leaned against walls, crowded in doorways, everyone buzzing with rumors. Hannah walked in like a general returning to her battlefield, chin high, lips curled into a tight smile, but the whispers followed her like shadows. She tried to seize control, standing at the podium, voice sharp. "Don't let yourselves be misled by slander. Everything I've done has been for Silverwood Hills, for you. These accusations are malicious lies from a man who doesn't even belong here." But then Nancy stood, hands trembling, voice wavering but steady enough to be heard. "That's not true, Hannah. You forged minutes. You hid money. You threatened my job when I asked questions. You betrayed all of us!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard, the treasurer, stood next. "I signed checks because you told me everything was approved. You lied to me, too." The room erupted, neighbors shouting, demanding answers. Hannah's mask cracked. Her face flushed, her words turned frantic. "Fine, yes. I did what I had to do. I bent the rules, but it was for you. For this community. Without me, you're nothing." And then the doors opened. The district attorney stepped in with Detective Morgan at his side. Silence fell heavy as they crossed the room. "Mrs. Price," the DA said firmly, "we have evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of funds. You're under investigation. I suggest you step aside." The Queen of Silverwood Hills was finished. Her husband and Mark's sister were indicted alongside her. Hannah pled guilty in the end, stripped of her position, banned from ever running an HOA again. They sold their home in shame, leaving town with nothing but a ruined name. But Jake kept his promise. On his new land, he built a real trail, this time legally, with permits and care. He named it the Harold Bennett Memorial Trail, honoring the man who trusted him with the woods. A plaque at the gate told Harold's story, a reminder of respect for both nature and ownership. The HOA, Under new leadership, it finally became what it was supposed to be, a group serving the people, not ruling them. And the money Hannah was forced to repay? Jake suggested it fund scholarships in ethics and leadership. The community voted yes, unanimous for once. Jake had moved to Silverwood Hills for peace. He hadn't wanted a fight. But when the fight came to his door, he didn't just survive it, he won it. And in the end, he didn't just gain land. He gained something far more valuable, a community that finally saw the truth. And Hannah? Last Jake heard, she was renting a small apartment downtown. No HOA, no trails, no crown. If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA or a neighbor who thought they owned you, smash that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more wild tales. Because trust me, this isn't the last time an HOA will bite off more than it can chew.